Let me ask you something. When was the last time you were somewhere, in a concert, a cathedral, a candlelit room, and time stopped? Not slowed down, stopped. Like a moment was bigger than the clock. Most of us can name a time, but most of the time we can't explain it. As a music director and a liturgical musician, I spent years asking the same question in different rooms. What is actually happening here? What is this thing we keep doing week after week, century after century, and why does it still matter? Every time I thought I had a clean answer, worship surprised me again. Whether it's a congregation singing a hymn they've sung 100 times and it lands in a completely different way, or a 10-year-old girl singing the Gloria at the top of her lungs with no idea she's part of something ancient. Worship doesn't behave in the way we expect it, and I think that's the point. Now, Martin Luther had 95 things he needed to say about the church. He felt so strongly about him that he nailed them to a door. I admire the commitment. I only have 7, and I promise you I will not be nailing anything to anything. But in the spirit of tradition, I am standing up and saying, this is what I actually believe. And that's exactly what this is. 7 things I believe about worship, about the spaces, the music, the table, the calendar, the silence, why ancient things still work, and why I think this conversation is more urgent right now than it has ever been. So let me start with the most basic question. What actually is worship? We've started talking about it in the language of production, attendance, engagement, experience design. Those aren't entirely wrong, but somewhere in that conversation, we swapped out the original question for a smaller one. We stopped asking, what is this? And started asking, how do we make this work? I believe worship is an encounter, not an event. An event can be planned, executed, and improved, but an encounter implies 2 parties. Something is coming towards you, not just being presented to you. And that shifts everything about how you walk into a room on a Sunday morning. As a music director, my preparation for service functions almost like a ritual. Reviewing the score, warming up, entering the space. And none of that gives me new information, but those repeated actions shift me. I'm not the same person at the organ than I was in the parking lot. The ritual made the difference. Karen Armstrong, in her book, The Case for God, puts it this way: ritual forms perception through practice rather than belief. You don't think your way into a different relationship with the sacred. You do things repeatedly in a community, and those things slowly reshape how you see. The ritual is not the packaging around the experience, it is the mechanism. It's how encounter becomes possible. So the real question isn't, does this feel good? It's, did we create conditions for an encounter? Did we build something open enough, honest enough, that someone could arrive from beyond the room? That's what I'm working toward every week. Not a better event, but a more honest encounter. If worship is an encounter, then the next question is unavoidable. Where does it happen? And I mean that literally. What does a room do to you before a single word is spoken? I believe that sacred space is a theological argument, not a backdrop. The space itself is making a claim about who God is, what human beings are, and what happens when they gather. Whether we designed it that way or not, the space is always speaking. The question is whether or not we're listening. One of my favorite spaces is St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, and that place does something to your body before the liturgy even begins. The vocality, the fans vaulting, the light through the medieval stained glass windows, before you've processed any of it consciously, your shoulders have dropped, your breathing has slowed, and your eyes have gone upward. The building has already done something liturgical. It is saying, you are small. There is something here larger than you, and you're invited to it. That's doctrine expressed in stone and glass. St. John the Divine says something different but equally true. It's been under construction since 1892, unfinished but still becoming. When you walk in, you feel that. The raw stone says the church is still becoming what it's meant to be. The kingdom hasn't fully arrived. This is not over. That honest incompleteness is also a theological argument. Now, most of us don't work in places like these, but the principle holds true everywhere. Even a simple room can make an argument. The arrangement of the chairs, the quality of silence before the service, whether the space draws our eyes upward or keeps everything at eye level, all of that speaks before anyone opens their mouth. Every decision about space should serve this. It should serve the encounter we're trying to create. The great cathedrals understood this. Nothing was accidental. The beauty was always in service of something beyond itself. We're going to shift to something a little bit more personal to me, and that's music. I believe that music is a liturgical act in itself. It does theological work and carries meaning that words alone cannot express. If you take it away, you get something completely different. Augustine said that to sing is to pray twice. What stands out to me about this is that he wrote it in the 4th century, but the church had already been singing for centuries before that. Think of the hymn Jesus and his disciples sang during the Last Supper, or Paul writing to the Ephesians about psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. From the very beginning, the church knew that some things could not be spoken, that they must be sung. This is a 1,500-year-old journey in how music shapes people. From plain song to polyphony, monastic chant to Bach, the Anglican cathedral tradition to gospel choirs. Every generation has joined the conversation and found again that music does something to people that nothing else can. Gregorian chant does not compete with anything. It simply exists, unhurried and moving at the pace of the breath. It was written not for an audience, but for prayer itself. It is the oldest continuously performed music in Western civilization, and it still works. That alone should tell us something. Anglican chant gives us the full range of emotion of psalms, a musical home. Even the difficult texts, anger at God, abandonment, raw grief. Sung week after week, these texts shape the congregation's imagination. All of this is welcome here. You don't have to pretend to feel a faith you do not have today. That is what formation looks like. One of my favorite choral pieces is Will Todd's My Lord Has Come, which keeps waiting until the arrival feels fully earned. The music does not just describe Advent, it lives in it. On the opposite side of the liturgical calendar, you have Bob Chilcott's St. John's Passion with some pretty amazing hymns in it. And one in particular is There is a Green Hill Far Away. His arrangement does not offer comfort too soon. It stays with what has happened before, letting you move forward. That kind of resistance is a theological choice expressed through music. All of it is liturgy. The real question is not which one is authentic, but whether it is honest. Does it take people somewhere or just perform for them? The 1,500-year church history of music is not just something for a museum. It's a living inheritance that we are responsible for receiving honestly, passing on faithfully, and adding to our own voice to. Now I want to talk about something that I believe is one of the church's most quietly radical acts. The church invented its own calendar, not as a historical footnote, as a theological statement. Choosing to organize time around the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ rather than the fiscal year or the news cycle is one of the most counterculture things that the church has ever done. I believe liturgical time is a counter-narrative, and I think we desperately need it. The service of Advent lessons and carols is one of the most formative liturgical experiences of my year. It arrives in December in the darkness when the world has been celebrating Christmas for weeks, and it simply refuses. It says, "Not yet." The waiting is the point. Something important happens in the space between the promise and the fulfillment, and we will not rush past it. That refusal is a theological act. The Easter Vigil does something no single Sunday morning can replicate. Hours of darkness before the fire is lit, before the light spreads by candle through the congregation, before the exultant breaks open the night. You experience the resurrection differently when you've actually waited for it. The liturgy puts you inside the story. In Lent's Vesper service, the ancient evening prayer brings that same counter-narrative into the end of every day. Morning and evening, work and rest, light and darkness, all of it held within a framework of offering and trust. I want to talk about the thing that holds it all together. The thing that for me has become not just meaningful, but genuinely necessary: the table. I believe the Eucharist is where time collapses, and I think that makes it the irreducible center of what it means to gather as the people of God. There is a well-known case in neurology of a patient who after brain surgery, lost the ability to form new long-term memories. Each day begins from the same fixed point, disconnected from everything before it. What decades of research revealed was profound. Memory and identity are not separate things. They are the same thing. Without that thread connecting the past to the present to the future, a person cannot maintain a stable sense of who they are, in the most precise sense, lost. Now think of what happens to a community that stops gathering at the table, that gradually loses the practice of staying together with bread, with wine, with these ancient words. This is who we are. This is what we've done for us. This is what was done for us. Slowly, the community loses its place in the story. It forgets what it is. I think of it as spiritual amnesia, and the Eucharist is the church's oldest antidote to forgetting. Do this in remembrance of me. Those words are both a diagnosis and a prescription, an acknowledgement that communities drift, that without repeated embodied acts of remembrance, even the most important things in life fade. What I find extraordinary about the Eucharist is that it holds the past, present, and future in a single moment. The past arrives, the specific meal, that specific act of self-giving. The present arrives, this community right now with everything they are carrying. And the future arrives, a foretaste of the feast still to come. Time collapsing into one act of remembrance and hope. The early church understood how central this was, not occasional, but the heartbeat of the community. 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years of gathered people coming with empty hands, everyone receiving the same gift, practiced week after week, that forms something real. The Eucharist doesn't just remind the church of its identity, it constitutes it. Something that I think people treat about worship as a flaw is something I think is actually its greatest strength, and that's tension. In music, harmonic tension is not a mistake. An unresolved chord creates longing and forward motion. It says we're not there yet. And that anticipation is what makes the resolution feel earned. When music resolves too quickly, it becomes pleasant but doesn't take you anywhere. The same is true about worship. This refusal to resolve, sitting with your discomfort, letting weight and beauty coexist, is one of worship's most formative qualities. It separates worship that forms people from worship that merely satisfies them. When everything resolves immediately, every difficult text softened, every silence filled, every confession rushed past before its weight registers, the service feels smooth, but it doesn't form people. It satisfies them. Those are very different things. Sacred architecture understands that indistinctively. Light needs shadow. Remove the shadow and you don't get more light, you get less. Confession before absolution, lament before praise, silence before proclamation. Each contrast carries the conditions in which the light, when it arrives, can actually land. Excellence in worship is not smooth transitions, it's integrity. The willingness to hold tension long enough for it to do its work. When worship lingers instead of rushing, when it lets weight and beauty coexist without forcing a resolution, something begins to happen. It unsettles, it clarifies, it reshapes, and only then it stands. Now, to bring this all around into the world we're living in today, worship is in decline. The numbers are not ambiguous. Fewer people are gathering, fewer are returning, and the ones that do often aren't sure why they came. Any serious conversation about worship today has to start there. Waiting for it to correct itself is not a strategy. The predominant response has been to make worship more like the surrounding culture. Its aesthetic, its pacing, its relationship to entertainment and immediate gratification. I understand that's instinct. It comes from a genuinely good place, but I think it's a misdiagnosis. The problem isn't that worship has been too strange. The problem is that it hasn't been strange enough. Not inaccessible, but genuinely other. Because the hunger is real. A hunger for depth, for silence, for something that doesn't move at the pace of a social media post or for a story bigger than itself. The hunger is exactly what the liturgical tradition, taken seriously, not watered down, is designed to address. The question isn't how we make worship more like culture, it's how we help people discover that what the culture cannot give them, the church actually has. This is where courage comes in. Not the courage to innovate, but the courage to trust. To believe that the ancient forms are not exhausted, that silence still works, chant still works, gathering around a table still works, that a liturgy which forms people slowly and honestly over time is not failing. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. The communities that will matter are the ones courageous enough to be genuinely different, offering depth when culture offers speed, silence when the culture offers noise. Because the courage to truly worship, honest and fully, is one of the most genuinely counterculture things a human being can do. And I believe that it is worth every bit of the risk. So, here we are. 7 things. No door, no nails. But I hope that the Spirit has the same thing, standing up and saying, this is what I actually believe. I want to resist the urge to wrap everything up neatly. Everything I've talked about So here we are. 7 things, no door, no nails. But I hope the Spirit is still the same, standing up and saying, this is what I actually believe. I want to resist the urge to tie everything up neatly. Everything I argued about is not rushing to a conclusion, so I won't summarize or go back over what we covered. Instead, I just want to say this. I've given my life up to this work. the spaces, the music, the table, the calendar, and the silence. Not because I have all the answers, not because worship always works as it should, but every now and then in the middle of this ordinary, imperfect, faithful gathering, something happens that I did not plan and cannot take credit for. Something comes from beyond the room and meets the community right where it is. That is what worship is. That is what it has always been. 1,500 years of people gathering, singing, breaking bread, waiting in darkness, lighting fires, and refusing to forget who they are. And I think that is worth defending, worth doing honestly, worth doing well, worth doing even when the culture around us largely has stopped believing that it matters. Martin Luther had 95 reasons the church needed to wake up. I only had 7, but beneath all of them is the same conviction he had. What happens when people of God gather is not a small thing. It is not optional. It is not a relic. It is one of the most defiant and hopeful acts available to a human being. And I believe that is worth every bit of the risk.